Better tokenomics needs data. That's the case I'm going to put to you today. We'll look at how real-world data can improve our tokenomic analysis and engineering, and how these data providers can help you step up to the task. Some important shoutouts first. This video series would not have been possible without Token Engineering Academy. They approached me to co-author a newsletter on the subject and reached out to all the platforms featured to get us access to their premium services to make this possible. I've recommended Token Engineering Academy before. You definitely should check out their courses, Discord community, and sign up to their newsletter. They are building a great network of economic thinkers and innovators in this space, and they will serve you with all the best and latest goings on in this field. Find links in the description box below. I also want to thank the teams at Masari, Token Terminal, Token Unlocks, and Artemis for lending their time and support to guide us through their platforms and answer questions that we had along the way. Zero kickbacks or commercial deals for those endorsements, just gratitude and a genuine belief that these guys are building great products that you can benefit from too. No shade at DeFi Llama either, by the way. Their platform happens to be completely open, so we didn't need to engage with their team for this project. Anyway, each of these platforms have a lot going on, so I've decided to dedicate an entire review video to each one. That's 5 whole review videos coming up, and we're going to cap that off with a final video comparing them with each other. But before we get on with all that, today we're going to do my favorite thing in the whole world, which is to kick off with a why video, which sets out the motivations and goals for this exercise. And to understand our why today, we're going to cover the following. We're going to look at why we need real-world data for tokenomic analysis and engineering, what data we need to do that specifically, and how new updates and releases by these data providers are going to be able to help us do that. So let's begin with the first question. Why do we need data for tokenomic analysis and engineering? This may look like a dumb question with an obvious answer, but it's worth taking seriously and get into the detail to answer it. This will help us understand where tokenomics is at today, what our needs are, and be able to evaluate the data and services that those providers make available. So let's sharpen our focus by making this question even more extreme. Do we need any data at all? Because a lot of tokenomics content doesn't really use any. It just relies on verbal argument, built up on presumed theoretical concepts, logic, and intuition. And indeed, traditional economics started out that way, being more like philosophy, primarily expressed and argued using human language. Real-world evidence only contributed in loose and vague ways by reference to anecdotal observation and historical accounts, which were all subject to bias and interpretation. All of that persisted into the first half of the 20th century. 2 of the most influential books in the early modern period, Keynes's General Theory of Unemployment and Hayek's Road to Serfdom, made their expositions entirely in the written word. But unfortunately, verbal reasoning is problematic. It is difficult to deliver strong, decisive conclusions, and it is hard to establish clear, unambiguous shared premises to drive the arguments with in the first place. We risk ending up with the same inconclusive and never-ending debates that have plagued philosophy and politics for thousands of years. A desire to shift economics away from rhetoric to rigor contributed to a big change in the middle of the 20th century, one which saw economists begin to make use of mathematics much more extensively. In this new approach, economists would define basic properties of a system in mathematical terms and use math rules to derive interesting and unexpected conclusions that were incontestably valid because math. But it's really important to understand that even though this new approach was mathematical and quantitative, it was still only weakly empirical. It did not make extensive, rigorous use of real-world data, and with fair reason, because for all practical purposes, there wasn't any. The systems that economists were studying were too large and complex. There were ethical limitations to applying experimental methods, and there were serious limitations with data collection and computing power at the time. And so modern economics developed following this abstract formal approach, which still dominates the academic canon today. Unfortunately, this came with a big problem. The same simplifying assumptions that helped to make these models clear and analyzable made them fail to line up with reality in dramatic ways. There's an endless line of jokes in academic circles about how economists, supposed scientists no less, just assumed their way out of anything, but the consequences really were serious. Behavioral economics demonstrated that humans frequently don't behave in ways that follow the mathematical assumptions that underpin microeconomics and game theory. And in the meantime, macro had simplified money and finance to such an extent that they entirely disappeared from the leading models altogether, making it impossible for them to predict the financial crisis of 2008. So if we look at these two modes of economic analysis, they mirrored the dominant modes of analysis used in tokenomics today, and those are arguably subject to the same shortcomings. But if we have relevant, real-world data available, things could really change. We could check what goes in and what goes out of our verbal and mathematical models. And luckily for us, a significant expansion in data availability is currently underway that can help us begin to do that. The data providers that we're going to review are among those that are leading this change. But why is this only happening now? Some of these platforms have been around for a while. Well, their businesses grew out of serving the needs of traders and investors, so fittingly, the first data sets that they provided were very focused on exchange market activity. However, if you believe that token economies and token utility are a real thing, market data offers limited scope to understand it. We can illustrate this with a totally generic depiction of a token economy. In addition to the exchange markets and financially motivated traders and investors, we have some utility-motivated users, the smart contracts that serve them that utility, some kind of process for monetary or token supply governance, which affects how many tokens are in circulation, and remember, those may or may not be smart contract governed, and some vital auxiliary business functions and activities that are carried out by the project's team. But if all that we have is market data, all these other parts of the economy get left out and stay in the dark. Sure, perhaps they influence what happens inside of markets and the data that come out of them, but we can't really tell that apart looking at market data alone. Luckily for us, though, investors are beginning to take an interest in these broader economic data, and the data providers are beginning to include them in their offerings. And at the same time, they're doing something else that's incredibly exciting, because it isn't like everybody knows and agrees what additional data we want or need from over there. If that were the case, the challenge would be limited to tracking that data down and then supplying it. But what's actually happening here is that the data providers are having to think for themselves about what data is of interest in the first place and what new, meaningful metrics can be created from the data that they already have. In this sense, the data providers are actively participating and defining what counts as interesting and informative data, and so they're making contributions to the development of analytical standards and best practice. And so I decided that I also want to bring those contributions into focus for this review, in addition to looking at their data and platform features. Which brings us to the 4 focus areas that I'll be applying to each platform review. Data coverage. What kind of data is being served on the platform and how much of it provides insight into the fundamental processes and activities taking place outside of exchange markets? Accessibility and flexibility. How easy is it to explore data directly on the platform and to export it to other work environments for further analysis and exploration? Documentation. How rigorously and thoroughly are the methods and definitions used by the platform described? Because there are always assumptions, workarounds, and it helps us to understand what they are explicitly. And finally, best practice innovation. How does the data offering and the auxiliary resources around it support the innovation and development of best practices for analysis? All the platforms are actually really different to each other, so by exploring them all in this common way, hopefully that creates some consistency to my evaluation and enables us to draw some comparisons and conclusions in that final video. So are you ready? Let's go!